The forests on the outskirts of Chicago have always been a place of eerie whispers and unsettling sights. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning travelers to stay clear, especially when the mist rolled in from the lake, blanketing the woods in a cold, damp fog. But some, like Jake and his friends, were too curious for their own good. One autumn night, Jake, along with his childhood friends, Sarah and Tom, ventured into the woods. They had heard the tales of the haunted forest, a place where, decades ago, a small town had mysteriously vanished, leaving behind only the remnants of a church and a crumbling graveyard deep within the trees. What lured them there was the thrill of the unknown, the temptation of facing the fear that gripped the town. The moment they entered the forest, the air changed. The temperature dropped sharply, and the usual sounds of nature, chirping birds, rustling leaves, ceased. An unnatural silence filled the woods, broken only by the faint crunch of their boots on the ground. Despite the unease, they pressed forward, determined to find the old church and prove that the stories were just that, stories. Hours passed, and the deeper they ventured, the stranger the woods became. Trees twisted unnaturally, their bark seeming to pulse in the dim moonlight. Sarah swore she saw shadows moving between the trees, but every time she turned to look, nothing was there. Tom laughed it off, trying to ease the tension, but Jake could see the fear beginning to flicker in his eyes. Eventually, they stumbled upon the graveyard. The headstones were old and weathered, their inscriptions barely legible. At the far end stood the remains of the church, its roof collapsed and its stone walls covered in moss. A sense of dread washed over them as they approached the entrance. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the scent of decay. In the center of the church lay a large, cracked altar, and behind it, the faint outline of a figure. At first, they thought it was a statue, but as they drew closer, the figure moved. It was a woman, or what once was a woman. Her pale skin was stretched tight over her bones, her eyes hollow and dark. Her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile as she stepped forward. The temperature dropped even further, their breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, the walls of the church began to tremble, and the sound of whispers filled the air, voices that seemed to come from all around them, growing louder and more frantic. "Leave, now," the voices hissed. "Before it's too late." Panic set in. Tom bolted for the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping them inside. The woman's twisted figure began to float towards them, her hollow eyes fixed on Jake. He could feel her presence in his mind, a cold, overwhelming force that made it hard to breathe. Sarah screamed, collapsing to the floor as the whispers grew louder, drilling into their skulls. Jake tried to pull her to her feet, but she was frozen in terror. The woman's smile widened, revealing sharp, jagged teeth, as the shadows around them began to close in.